Under the reign of Disney's Lucasfilm, Star Wars has gone from one of the biggest movies of all time in The Force Awakens to the flop of the year with Solo: A Star Wars Story. In between them was Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi, a movie which does have its fans, but which caused a huge chunk of the audience to jump off Disney's Star Wars bandwagon, and instead actively riot against the direction the franchise has taken. But rather than focus on where Lucasfilm and the filmmakers stepped wrong, the media outlets covering the debacle have almost exclusively focused on how toxic the Star Wars fanbase itself has become. Most recently, filmmakers like Christopher McQuarrie and James Mangold joined the conversation, one claiming he would never do a Star Wars movie if that's how fans are going to respond, the other continuing that in the end, only hack directors will take on Star Wars. In this editorial, I will first look into the popular claim that Star Wars fandom is toxic and add some much needed nuance to it. With that established, I will move on to the filmmakers who now have started speaking out against the fans, give my take on the jab about only hacks wanting to work on Star Wars, before concluding with some suggestions of my own. The narrative repeated by multiple outlets is that Star Wars fandom is toxic. Star Wars fans are described in the same terms used since Ghostbusters fans were the ones on blast. Terms like misogynist, racist, white man-babies, conveniently ignoring that there are plenty women and non-whites among the protesters, and as alt-right deplorable Trump supporters. Again conveniently ignoring that half the fans hate them as much or more than they do what Disney has done to Star Wars. Just like when it was used against the fans of Ghostbusters, Star Trek and Fantastic Four, this narrative is so simplistic, so exaggerated, so void of nuance, it becomes a joke. Because behind all the labeling, behind all the missing of the mark, there is at the very least a grain of truth. Like in all fan bases, among Star Wars fans, there are those who take their zeal a tad too far. Ahmed Best, the actor behind the punchline that is Jar Jar Binks, recently joined the toxic fans conversation by saying that the Episode 1 and Jar Jar backlash almost drove him to suicide. I can well believe that. I remember interviews from before the release of Episode 1, in which Best talked about how badly he had been bullied as a kid, how much he felt like an unwanted outcast, how he identified with Jar Jar because of it, and how he couldn't wait for the audience response to his character once the movie opened. I remember thinking the aftermath must have been pretty hard on him. Also, Jake Lloyd's life was more or less destroyed by being in Episode 1, and more recently Kelly Marie Tran, the actress playing Rose Tico, left Twitter. Oh, the horror. She didn't actually say why, but the narrative goes it must have been because of racist and sexist abuse from Star Wars fans, and for all we know that may be the case. The Star Wars fan base includes a massive amount of people, most of whom are very civil in their discourse, but there is a minority who aren't, and since the number of Star Wars fans overall is so big, so is the absolute number of the relative minority that do take their vitriol a bit too far. In my experience, even the average Star Wars fans tend to be more passionate about Star Wars than the average fan of most anything else, so the hardcore fans will really let you have it if you mess with Star Wars. Not because they're white or alt-right or Trump supporters, which they might not even be, but because they are really passionate about Star Wars. What the filmmakers need to understand is why that is. However circumstantial it may be, I have a theory on the matter, which I've discussed at greater length before. In short, all of the most hardcore Star Wars fans I ever met or interacted with grew up with Star Wars. They didn't discover it on their own, they were introduced to it by their parents, often before they were infatuated with anything else, and told that this is the greatest thing ever. Sharing those moments with family and loved ones, while still young and impressionable, is the recipe for not only nostalgia, but for making it part of who you are. By contrast, those who were exposed to Star Wars much later in life, like myself, really don't see what the fuss is all about. But to those that grew up with the brand, those who hold a childhood affection towards it, it may take on a near spiritual importance. They will be very protective of it, because of what it represents and means to them. They're happy to see it continue, but not in a way which, to use a cliché, destroys their childhood. What this should mean to filmmakers is that while there are a lot of properties out there you can deconstruct all you want and twist and turn into their something radically different from what they once were, Star Wars is not among those properties. There are some rules that need to be followed, and that especially goes for the legacy characters. Rian Johnson says he distilled what Star Wars meant to him in The Last Jedi. If that is the case, then he must have gotten something very different out of it than most others, because a lot of fans seem to agree that what he did to Luke Skywalker was tantamount to iconoclasm. Johnson has taken heat from fans ever since, and recently, another filmmaker was caught in the crossfire. On June 28th, screenwriter turned director Christopher McQuarrie posted a tribute to author Rod Serling and praised him for inserting progressive and socially conscious messages into his stories. This led to some pushback, which escalated quickly when Rian Johnson got involved. Many nasty messages back and forth later, McQuarrie tweeted that he didn't understand why Johnson was still on Twitter, and that any desire he might have had to make a Star Wars movie was now gone. Star Wars had lost a director it never had, and for all we know, was never going to have. This didn't stop the media from portraying it as toxic fans caused a potential director to drop out. Addressing the situation a week later, James Mangold, the famed director of Logan, who is also attached to direct the Boba Fett anthology movie if that ever is put back into production, tweeted that at the point when work writing and directing big franchises has become the emotionally loaded equivalent of writing a new chapter of the Bible, with the probable danger of being stoned and called a blasphemer, then a lot of bolder minds are gonna leave these films to hacks and corporate boards. Sometimes, just being quiet is the better course of action, and this might have been one of those times. Let's break down why. First of all, when you are writing and directing a big franchise movie, you have been tasked with managing what amounts to hundreds of millions of other people's money, resources you have been entrusted with. It should be emotionally loaded, and you should feel the pressure. Secondly, Star Wars is not just a big franchise. Mission Impossible is a big franchise, The Fast and the Furious is a big franchise, and The Pirates of the Caribbean is a big franchise, and in the bigger scheme of things, no one cares about any of them. Subverting and reinventing them will be just fine, as long as the end result keeps people entertained and the box office receipts flowing. In addition to being merely a big franchise, Star Wars is an institution. More than that, it is part of our cultural heritage, and even I, as a casual fan at best, recognize that. Writing a new chapter of the Bible comparisons aren't entirely unfair, because to a lot of people out there, that is in some figurative sense what you are doing. So yes, feel that pressure. Don't for a second think you are making just another big franchise movie. Messing up Jurassic Park and messing up Star Wars are two very different things. Then we get to the most infuriating part of Mangold's tweet, in which he essentially says that fear of fan backlash will cause, quote, bolder minds, which I think it's fair to interpret as auteur filmmakers with a vision to leave Star Wars, so that hack directors will helm them instead, under the guidance of corporate boards. Ignoring for the moment just how condescending an attitude that is towards his fellow filmmakers, whom he would label hacks, I disagree with the implied main point, that bold-minded auteurs are somehow desirable for Star Wars. Don't get me wrong, some of the best movies of all time have been made by bold-minded auteurs and visionaries, like Charlie Chaplin, Akira Kurosawa, Alfred Hitchcock, Stanley Kubrick, Werner Herzog, Pedro Almodovar, and even Wes Anderson, to name but a few. They are all makers of great standalone films in which they had full creative freedom. Operating wood being standalone. Because if you let one bold-minded auteur have his way with another bold-minded auteur's vision, the results might not be pretty. Case in point, auteur filmmaker Ang Lee did some pretty bold-minded choices on his 2003 Hulk movie. That worked out so badly that 5 years later, it took a director that Mangold probably would label a hack, Louis Leterrier, to wash away the damage caused by Ang Lee's bold-minded choices. If only Universal hadn't vetoed Mark Ruffalo for Banner and insisted on Ed Norton, who would go on to make some bold-minded behind-the-scenes issues, that movie might have been something truly special. It could be that Mangold refers to himself and what he did with Logan as bold-minded, which from a studio's point of view, it no doubt was. But from the fan point of view, Logan was simply the Wolverine movie they always wanted, but never thought they were going to get. Mangold made the right choices on it, which were in keeping with the characters and the spirit of what came before. Imagine for a moment if Rian Johnson had made the same bold-minded choices on The Last Jedi that Mangold did on Logan. That is, have him be a grizzled old man, weathered by a hard life, but who stayed true to his purpose and friends, who after some struggle takes his unknown daughter under his wing, finds redemption, and then goes out in a blaze of glory that shall live on forever. But doing that in Star Wars wouldn't have been bold. It would have been the choice so natural and so obvious that even a corporate board should have been able to figure it out. A hack director should have been able to film it, and the movie would have received standing ovations from the fans for it. What was bold was making Luke a quitter who tried to kill Leia and Han's child, turned his back on Rey for real, and kicked the bucket after merely projecting himself, Loki style. That kind of bold-minded filmmaking is why we are having this backlash and conversation to begin with. So if fewer bold-minded filmmakers like that want to do Star Wars, that might not be such a bad thing. Now don't get me wrong, even within a franchise film setting, auteur filmmakers can excel. Marvel has had great success with that, because the producers made sure the directors would restrict their vision and bold-minded choices to what worked within the confines of the established cinematic universe. So yeah, going back to Mangold's point, for something like Star Wars, I'd honestly rather have a, and let me stress that, competent corporate board telling a hack director in detail what to do than an author who will deconstruct the hell out of the property just for the sake of being bold-minded. But that's my opinion, what's yours? Would you like to see more bold-minded directors have free reign on Star Wars, or should the confines be determined at the corporate level? Let me know in the comments.
If you like this video, then please click the subscribe button. And don't forget to click the bell icon to be notified for all the latest uploaded content. Due to recent changes to YouTube's monetization policies, we'd also like to ask you to please consider supporting Midnight's Edge and its sister channel Midnight's Edge After Dark through Patreon. As thanks for their support, patrons will receive early notifications of mini-documentaries, special behind-the-scenes making of the Edge videos, bloopers, outtakes, lost episodes, and more. You can support the channel for as little as $1 a month. Be sure to check back for news and analysis on the corporate politics behind your favorite genre movies, as well as updates and discussion here at Midnight's Edge.